Hey, do you like tanks? If so, you're not alone. So do I. Also, so do a lot of others, considering there's such a thing as Tank Fest in this world. I've never been, but if you have, please gloat in the comments below. Now on to the actual topic of this video, that there main battle tank found in Fallout 4's Boston. What the heck is going on with that thing? Let's get into it. The US Army's MBT is a nuclear-powered, obviously heavy tank weighing in at a whopping 60 tons with dual 140mm cannons. It has the approximate dimensions of 10 feet wide, 9 feet tall, and 20 feet long. This particular tank also features quad tracks, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. The pro of this design is it allows the tank to theoretically forward incline smoother, but this comes at the drawback of being significantly more vulnerable to getting stuck in ditches that a tank with 2 tracks would generally be able to overcome. More downsides to this approach is the increase in maintenance complexity, both in the number of tracks and the access to said tracks. Not going to lie though, it looks cool. Finally, it's believed that this 60-ton tank starts with a key turn, if you can believe that. If a nuclear tank sounds absurd to you, good, because it is. But it might surprise you that back in the 50s, some crazy Chrysler engineers actually designed such a thing, though it was only a proposed 25 tons. Hey, given that though, it would be pretty cool if this tank's manufacturer was Chrysler or Corvega. In my own headcanon, I'm just gonna assume it is. Given that, and the fact the tank was modeled on our timeline's M46 Patton, I think I'll call it the Chrysler Patton for the rest of this video, rather than tank. Let me know in the comments below if you've got a better name for it. I'd love to hear it. Anyways, that's pretty much all the basic info that we were explicitly told in the canon, but we can derive some other interesting approximate stats from the Patton. The Patton was a 44-ton main battle tank used by the United States Army in Korea, and was powered by an air-cooled V12 with 700 horsepower, with exhaust manifolds present on the rear wings of the tank chassis, making me think the structure on the wings of the Chrysler MBT are radiators. Since you know, cooling nuclear power plants is kind of a pretty big deal. She was armed with a single, as most tanks are, 90mm cannon, and had a coax machine gun with an additional non-coax. Her max speed was 30 miles per hour, and she sported a 5-man crew with 3 in the turret, 1 pilot, and 1 co-pilot. Based on this, we can infer that the Chrysler Patton had a top speed of at least 30 miles per hour. Even though it's 16 tons heavier, I'm assuming the nuclear power bit would make up for that. I would even hazard to guess that such a tank would probably be about as fast as a heavy tank of today. The M1 Abrams, for example, which is also 60 tons and is powered by a turbine engine, has a publicly acknowledged max speed of 45 miles per hour, and likely goes faster as the real specs of current military vehicles are often not disclosed. Given that, we can assume that the Chrysler Patton can go around 45 miles per hour as well. Finally, we can hazard a rough idea that the tank would require at least a crew of 2, as evidenced by the pair of tankers trying to dig out the tank they took for a joyride, and probably would require at least 4, unless it happens to be fitted with an autoloader. Also, I would like to point out that next to the skeletal remains of those tankers is purified water. I don't know how that works, Bethesda. Anyways, back on track. I think most of us can agree that the tank looks pretty cool. Props to the modeler. But boy oh boy is it full of issues. Let's start off with my personal pet peeve here. Look at all those rivets. Why in the world would this tank be riveted when we know for a fact welding exists in the Fallout universe, thanks to the, oh I don't know, welding goggles, masks, and the actual blowtorch? For those of you that haven't watched way too many World War II documentaries like I have, welding hit its stride during the 40s, and was generally superior to rivets in every way. Firstly, given the crazy inflation in the Fallout universe, there is no way the US government would be paying for the skilled labor required to fit rivets, when they could pay low-skilled workers, or more likely robots, pennies in comparison, to perform the much simpler process of welding the metal plates together. Secondly, welding actually fuses the plates together, while rivets simply attach them. Thus, welding is more structurally sound. Third, riveting adds a lot of dead weight and fasteners when compared to simply fusing the existing masses of metal, and thus reduces the tank's combat potential. And finally, and I put these in the order I believe the Great War American bureaucrats would believe they should be in. When a plate with rivets is hit, there is a capacity for those rivets to shear themselves loose and become shrapnel, cutting the crew inside to ribbons. And then we can talk a little bit about the turret. No doubt dual cannons look really cool, but boy do they not make much sense. Both cannons are attached to the same turret and thus cannot be traversed side to side separately, although it does look that it might be possible to adjust each gun's elevation independently, perhaps allowing for a different spread between the two shells that the tank could fire if the two cannons are in fact linked. If the cannons are not linked and thus can fire independently, it is feasible you could see an increased rate of fire, although it adds a lot of weight with not a lot of value. I mean, realistically, if a single 140mm salvo hits the target, and to put this into context, the M1 Abrams has a 120mm salvo, another 140mm salvo isn't really going to make that much of a difference. Also, in a universe where VATS exists, it's hard to believe a tank like this wouldn't have a targeting system of some kind that would render the potential spread benefit of the individually elevated guns moot. So the dual cannons, at least in my mind, is a clear example of form over function. Also, looking at the turret itself, I'm pretty sure it can't be rotated a full 360 degrees. It looks like the radiators and other stylistic pieces on the tank's wings would make that impossible, so that's also not great. It's also hard to not notice the Christless patent seems to be missing any machine guns, coaxial or otherwise. This means without a sufficient infantry screen to keep the communists at a distance, it could easily be destroyed by a single bloke with a grenade, so long as he or she can avoid letting the 140mm cannons line him up. Additionally, this means that your heavy tank can pretty much only be used for combating other tanks and hardened positions, and thus isn't really useful as your army's spearhead as tanks traditionally are. Also, another real-life history side tangent. The US military learned that even if you don't think you need a machine gun, you need a machine gun, with the F-4 Phantom. The F-4 Phantom was a US Air Force jet fighter that saw combat in Vietnam and relied on the era's new and untried air-to-air missiles exclusively, leaving its pilots up a creek without a paddle whenever the tech inevitably failed. That is why even today, all US Air Force fighters have guns, even if they only have a few seconds of ammunition, and even though if you're trying to use a gun in a 5th generation aircraft, you have royally you-know-whatted. Moral of the story, military combat vehicles should always have guns. I would assume this would extend to tanks. So to wrap this video up, I wanted to muse a little bit on how one might use this tank, or really any tank in a world where power armor exists. I mean, think about it. Power armor is significantly smaller, and can absorb small arms fire just about as well as a tank, and probably fares about as well against anti-tank weaponry as well. So what do you need a tank for then? I can think of 3 advantages a tank may have off the top of my head. 1 being ammo storage capacity, 2 being the ability to serve as a mobile shield for infantry, and 3, potentially the tank could be cheaper as it's less advanced than a T-51 suit of power armor. Given those advantages, I suppose that would make a tank a cheap shield for infantry and a highly mobile artillery battery perhaps. What do you think a tank would be good for in such a situation yourself? Let me know in the comments. Well, that's it on the Christless patent heavy tank for me, at least for now. Thanks so much for watching, and hey, if you'd like me to do some more Fallout content like this, maybe consider dropping a mini nuke on that like button. And if you'd really like me to do more, consider subscribing. Bye Dingo out.